talks. Then we'll have a brief break, and I'll talk about the break after this. So Becky, take it away.
Cool, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the final project I did on my uni course. So I made procedurally generated Zelda dungeons. I'm just going to give like a basic overview of the project with an emphasis on how I applied pre-existing techniques to an existing open source game. So just quickly, I graduated from Derby University last year, and there I did an internship at 22 Cans working on Goddess with Peter Molyneux. This picture is actually representative of me escaping 22 Cans. Of course, I'm joking. It was amazing, and I learnt so much and met so many amazing people. And now I'm working at Platonic in the Midlands, and we're working on Ukulele, which is a spiritual successor to old 3D platformers. And that's my Twitter handle if you want to ask me any questions after. I'm going to skip questions at the end because it's been a long time since I worked on this project, so I can't remember everything quickly and in a way that wouldn't result in lots of awkward pauses, if that's okay. So my dissertation was adopting generative grammars to create levels for action-adventure games. I'm not going to focus on some of those aspects in this talk because I don't have enough time. If you want to learn more about other aspects, then I'm going to put a link to the dissertation at the end, and you can find my dissertation from there and read it. It was also presented at FDG and AISB by Tommy, who's over there, who spoke last year and flailed his arms around a lot. He was my dissertation supervisor, so we worked on it together. So when I was trying to come up with something to do for my dissertation, I found this paper, which is by that man over there, Joris, and I just couldn't believe that something this cool counted as research. So the paper basically analyzes Zelda dungeons, and I'll give a bit of background first. So one of the things that makes action-adventure dungeons more difficult to generate is that they have complex puzzle structures which tend to span the entire dungeon, and these will be more complicated to generate than, say, dungeons where you just have to go and clear out all the monsters and collect all the loot. An example of one of these structures that Joris identifies is you often have to defeat the mini-boss in the dungeon, get an item as a prize for defeating the mini-boss, use the item to leave the room to prove that you can use it to get to new places in the dungeon, and then eventually defeat the boss with the item that you've got. So that's one of the common structures in Zelda. And Joris's paper identifies this and other patterns, and sorry, I'm repeating myself. One dungeon in particular from Twilight Princess is this one, and Joris says that it's best represented as two distinct structures. Mission, which is the chart of the actions the player has to complete to get through the dungeon, and space, which is just the mission mapped onto the geometrical map of the dungeon. And he suggests that we generate dungeons in two distinct steps, one step for each of these structures. So the aims of my project were to use the techniques that Joris suggests in his paper, firstly to create dungeon missions, so that's using graph grammars. Secondly, to create dungeon maps using shape grammars. And then my third aim was to create a simple action-adventure demo game which uses the maps that are produced by the generated spaces. I did have more exotic ideas at first, like I was going to take Joris's idea and apply player modelling to it and change the dungeons as you play through, but Tommy pointed out that I did not have nearly enough time to do that. So it became more of, can the results of these generations be applied to a typical 2D tiled Zelda game? So my project was in 3 stages: the mission over there, the map, and then the Zelda game. I'm going to touch on the mission and map generation very briefly, but I'm going to focus on the map to Zelda game stage because it's the most interesting, and the other ones are documented well in other places. So this is the mission generation iterating. It's basically using rules to fill out bits of the graph until we have like a fully filled out mission. You can see here there's examples of what the symbols mean. You won't actually be able to see any of the symbols because they're too small, but there's things like key and K is key, L is lock, G is goal. And I created this in C# using WPF and GraphSharp, which is a free layout graph framework. And then equally as quickly, this is the map generation iterating. So it's just going through that mission graph, taking all the symbols, and then placing down a square in a grid for each of the symbols. Again, this was made in C# using WPF, and the symbols are the same. If you want to know why it's kind of reserving spaces for some of the rooms before it's going through and actually placing them down, then you can ask me later, or it's documented in my dissertation. So the main bit of my talk is going to focus on this bit. You may have noticed that pictures of the game are rectangular rooms only. I'm just going to have a bit of water and make an awkwardly long pause. Cool. So it's one room for one symbol of the grid. Obviously, this was the simplest way to take that space and get a dungeon out of it. But you might think it's not very representative of an actual 2D Zelda dungeon, but then I give you the face shrine, which is basically just a giant grid, so there you go. It just proves that there are actually Zelda dungeons. This is from Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening has quite a lot of kind of gritty dungeons. So they do kind of use the structure a lot, and it's not completely redundant research. But it is obviously very limiting, and the one symbol, one room thing worked better for some types of rooms than others. So I needed to find an open source Zelda game to apply my maps to. One of them stood out a lot above all the others. It was just such high quality. So this is Solaris. It's a game engine for action RPGs written in C++. It's also got a quest editor on top of it, which is basically like RPG Maker but for action RPGs. And then the team that created the quest editor and the engine also have created several games that are open source. One of them is Mystery of Solaris. And for my project, I didn't actually have to touch the engine source at all. I could do everything using the quest editor. And also I took some stuff from the Mystery of Solaris game, things like the HUD and the enemy behavior, though it wasn't of any benefit for me to do myself. So this is the map editor in Solaris. Usually what you do when you're creating a dungeon is you would have one entire floor of the dungeon in one file, like you can see there. And you can see all the different rooms connected by doors through that. But because of the grid structure, it actually made it really simple if I just created all my rooms in separate files like this. And then I could connect them together really easily. You can also see that all my rooms, you could place doors in the center of all of the walls. This was so that they obviously fit together, and it made sense when the player went from one to the other. These are some examples of some of my room layouts. So Zelda games have a lot of keys and locks in them. These are both literal keys and locks, like a small key in a locked door, but also metaphorical. For instance, that would be a big gap that you can't cross until you have the hook shot, or a rock you can't get past until you have bombs. And in this case, we have a multi-part key and a multi-part lock, which is you have to get several parts of a key before you can get through a locked door. So the type of multi-key I used, I actually took from Ocarina of Time, which is basically where there's 4 enemies, special enemies throughout the dungeon, and every time you kill one of them, a lantern in a room will light, and then once all 4 of the lanterns are lit, the door opens, and you can get through that room. Some more examples of the types of rooms I used. So the quest item room is the room you go into after you've defeated the mini-boss, where you get your prize. I chose bombs as the dungeon item for my generated dungeons for several reasons. They could be used as a key for traversing the dungeon. They could also be used for hiding secrets, like if you hide a heart container or whatever behind a bombable wall. They could be used for combat, and in particular, there was already a boss in the Mystery of Solaris game that could only be defeated by bombs, so that was perfect for fulfilling that structure that I spoke about earlier, where you have to use this item to get through the dungeon and eventually defeat the boss. I don't really know why I put this goal room in. It's just the room that you go to after you've defeated the final boss. I think it's to show off my amazing design skills and the fact that obviously you can never have enough torches for some reason. But I will reveal what was in the chest at the end of the dungeons at the end of my talk. So one of the biggest limitations, more water, sorry. So good. One of the biggest limitations of doing this way is that all the rooms had to be designed in a way that they were kind of symmetrical, in that we didn't know which way the player was going to come from or go to. So if there was a room that was supposed to act as a kind of obstacle, I had to make sure that obstacle was in place between all of the doors. So if the player came from any direction and went to any other direction, there had to be a bombable block in the way in this example. Obviously, that's not great. I could have solved it maybe by shifting the contents of the room based on the doors that were generated, or having loads and loads of different copies of the room that could be switched in and out based on which doors were generated. But for the scope of the project, I didn't have time to do that. So in the map editor, I created all my maps doorless, and then I had to go back to my space generator and think about how I was going to put all those doors into the maps. So I got really lucky. So this is an example of the interface you use to set up your doors. And you can see here that under the hood, it's all stored as plain text. So it's really simple to get at and really simple to change. For instance, you can see like the opening mode there, you can select and you can select an item required, and it's a small key. And then here it will say opening method is interaction if item, opening condition is small key. So it's really simple and really helpful for me. An example I'm going to use to talk about the files behind each room is the test room. This is typical in Zelda games. Basically, you just have to defeat all the enemies in the room, and then the doors will open. So this is a bigger picture of the map editor, just so you can see everything you can do in here. So you can place any of those tiles around. You can also place entities up the top there, things like pickups, enemies and stuff, and then they all have their separate dialogues where you can enter options and stuff. And all the information that is created by you interacting with that map editor is stored in the mapname.dat file, which is plain text. It's just a list of all the tiles that make up the map and all the entities that make up the map, and a list of their properties. So you can see there that the tiles have positions and sizes, and then the enemies also have things like save game variables, which are used to store whether you've killed it or not, and a breed. So this one is Bubble, so it means it's one of these red guys there that bounce around and don't really do much. It also contains properties for the map as a whole. So that's things like the tile set to use and also the music to play while you're in that dungeon. I could have done all my generation using these files and just chucked my doors in here, but there was actually an even easier way to do it. So each map file also has a Lua script associated with it, which is usually used for specifying behavior on certain events. So in this case, a normal example of behavior is saying, for each enemy in the room, when they're dead, check if all the enemies in the room have been killed, and if they have been, then play da-da-da-da-da-da-da and open all the doors. I was tossing up whether I was actually going to do that or just say secret sound. So basically, in the space generator, when it's generated a dungeon space that you're happy with, you can click the Apply to Solaris button, and then it goes through all the maps that are required to complete that space. And in their Lua scripts, it goes to the Unstarted function, which I left empty, and it just plugs in all this script, which says which doors to place where and where they're going to lead to. And in that way, it realizes the structure in the grid. So yeah, it was actually really clean in the end, because I could just chuck all my generated stuff in this function, and I could delete this and replace it with stuff easily. And it meant that those .dat files could stay pristine and exactly the way they were created in the map editor. Oh, look away if you don't want to see screenshots from Undertale. I didn't have a picture for this slide, and this reference went perfectly. I hope there's at least one person that gets it. So there were a few problems that I didn't think about conceptually when I was planning the project, which only really came to my attention when I was actually playing through the dungeons that I'd created. So I'll talk about a couple of them now. The first one is blocking secrets. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to use the bombs to hide secrets in my dungeon, but the grammars obviously weren't aware that this was going to happen, as if they're like sentient or something, I don't know. So when they were placing rooms down, they didn't account for the fact the player would have to have the bombs before they went through a secret room. So you could end up having an entrance here, for example, in green, and then the item when the player actually gets the bombs is there in purple. And a secret could be generated in between those. So in that case, you'd have a bombable wall that you couldn't get past, and it made the dungeon impossible to complete. The way I solved that was I made two types of secret rooms. One which needed a bomb to get through, and the other one was just like a default secret. So it's just blocks in the shape of a heart, and you have to push the block and make a heart, and then the doors open. So the way I decided which of these to put down is the algorithm that you saw earlier, placing rooms down in the grid. If it was trying to place a secret room down, and it hadn't already placed the room where the player gets the bombs, it would place down this default version of the secret room. If it had already placed the room where the player got the bombs, it could safely place down the bomb version of the secret test room. And that way you could get both of these spread throughout the whole dungeon, but the bomb room would never block the player from getting the bombs, and so the dungeons would be completable. Another issue I had was multiple sets of multi-keys. So this was these were the rooms I spoke about earlier, where you have to kill all the monsters and it will light all the lanterns and the doors will open. I hadn't thought about the fact that it's really confusing if you have two sets of these in one dungeon. You can see here one set is in blue and the other set is in red. And if you're trying to clear all these blue ones and open this door, and you go over here and kill one of the red ones, you're going to wonder why, when you go back to the room with all the lanterns in, that an extra one's not lit. So it could be really confusing. This wasn't actually a problem with the grammars or anything. It could have been solved if I had more than one implementation of the multi-key pattern, or if I just color-coded them or something. But for the scope of the project, I just tweaked the rules of the grammar so that it could only generate one of these per dungeon. So the conclusion of my dissertation was basically that it was successful. It made completable dungeons that worked, and a lot of people said it was really fun to play through. But obviously it was very limited for a lot of reasons, like the rectangular symmetrical rooms, the fact that everything was placed in a branching structure, so not what Joris was talking about a minute ago with cyclic generation, and the fact that the room templates were duplicated. So if you had 3 test rooms in one dungeon, I only had time to make 1 test room, so you'd have exactly the same room placed 3 times, and it could get really repetitive and boring because of that. So all of these things could be solved for further work. Also, there would be other bigger ways to expand, like having online generation. Everything was done offline in my project. Generating the contents of the room itself may be similar to how Tom Coxon does it in Lender's Inception. And also application to like maybe the overworld of Zelda or different types of game and map. I'm having Pokemon ideas at the moment that I want to start a side project on, which would be pretty amazing. If you're interested in taking the project and doing stuff with it, you can contact me. I'd be really willing to help. So I guess the moral of my talk for PROCJAM is to keep an open mind about pre-existing tools and content you can use. I assume this is okay and within the rules of PROCJAM. Not a very strict jam. So basically, yeah, Solaris wasn't designed as a tool to be used for this kind of thing. It was just a really cool editor and game that just the data happened to be stored in a way that was really easy to get at and edit, so it made it the perfect tool. So if you can do something like this, it'll take away a lot of the time you have to spend doing time-consuming but irrelevant work, and you can focus on your actual generation stuff. If you want more info, there's a link to my website there, and from there you can download my dissertation. You probably don't want to read it all because it's 100 pages long, But there's a literature review in there of loads of similar projects. A lot of the people in this room actually are in there. And there's also like a dev blog of the mission and space generation. So that goes into the like grammars and stuff more, and the problems I had and how I solved them. And there's also an evaluation of like the linearity and the leniency and stuff like that of the dungeons that were produced. And I'm going to upload these slides somewhere, so if you want any of this information on anything I've talked about, you can get that and look at the links. And I'll leave you with what was in the chest at the end of the dungeon. It was a croissant. Is it alright if I skip questions? There will be lots of awkward pauses and I won't know the answers to anything.
No worries. Well, you can perhaps have a quick chat over a break. We'll go slightly early to our break. Before we